All right, what is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of our weekly Wednesday live Q&As. This week's topic is a great one. It is all about hunger, and particularly hunger during prep. And I know a lot of people obviously struggle with hunger as we start to diet down, when our body fat levels go down, when we're eating less food, when we increase our activity level. Obviously hunger is probably the main issue and why people end up dropping out of their contest preps, to be honest, because they are just so hungry. So everybody's here is tuning in live on Facebook. I'm also recording these. They will be posted on my SoundCloud later today for those people who want to re-listen there. So as always, about 11 o'clock Central Time, I put up these questions on my Facebook page. Asking people, I should say these topics on my Facebook page, asking people to leave their comments, their questions they want me to talk about. So this week, since I'm in prep and since a lot of my friends are in prep, I thought that talking about hunger would be an interesting topic, to say the least. So we're going to dive right into it. And we're starting off with some great questions here. So let me go to the first one. As I said, these were all on Facebook, so if you guys want to participate in these, go to my Facebook account on Wednesdays, and usually about 11 o'clock you will see this post, and then feel free to comment. So Julie is leading us off with a great question. She says, when prepping, is it normal to take about 20 to 30 minutes for the desire of eating to go away basically after you eat? So what Julie is getting at is she eats her meal and she's hungry for an additional 10, 15, 20 minutes after she eats. And that is very common, and I'll get into this why coming up. And then she says after that, then it goes away, and then she's fine for a few hours. So Julie, I had to do a little bit of research because I didn't necessarily know the exact answer. So I do actually prepare for these videos, believe it or not. I don't just pull all this information out of my butt because I want to provide good information for you guys. So really what is happening when Julie eats, my guess is that she is actually eating very quickly. And the quicker you eat, your brain just doesn't have enough time to actually register that it's full, because there's actually chemical reactions that need to take place within the body for your brain to actually know that it's full. So getting into a little bit more of the science oriented stuff for you guys, I'll try to break this down as simply as possible because I try to talk in terms at least that I can understand. So when you eat too quickly, there's a hormone in your body, cholecystokinin, something like that. I know I'm probably saying that wrong. But anyway, that not only does your brain, when that's released, it senses that your stomach is full, but then it also slows down the digestion, or it slows the movement of food into the small intestine. So basically from your stomach to the small intestine. Now, if you eat too quickly, your brain just doesn't have enough time to register. So what I would recommend for Julie, and I'm going to have to remind myself to do this because I eat extremely fast. I've always eaten extremely fast, no matter if I'm in off season, no matter I'm in contest prep. So what we have to do in order for our brain to realize that we are eating is eat slower. Now, some of us are on a little bit more rush schedule, but more often than not, we do have the time to actually sit down, get a meal in, and not rush. For instance, I was rushing a little bit today when I got home. I had to cook, I had to do some laundry, I had to prepare for these videos, and I ate a little bit quicker than I probably should have. Once again, like I said, I typically eat very fast, and that's something that we're going to have to keep in the back of our minds. One other thing, another kind of sciencey thing that Julie is getting at, is the brain. Basically, there's a nerve in our brain called the vagus nerve, and that is the one in particular that senses if the stomach is expanding. Now, one other thing, and I know that we're kind of starting off very, very hard here with these questions, and very science oriented. But one thing that I did find was that the brain can actually sense if the stomach is just like full of water or it's actually full of nutrients. So like I said, there's more chemical reactions going on in your stomach because it actually senses there's nutrients in there. So if it senses that there's nutrients, you're going to be like, hey, you're finally feeding me. It's not the sheer fact that your stomach is just expanding, because we all know if we drink, 24 ounces of water, it's not as satisfying as actually eating a meal. So we can't necessarily trick our brain just because our stomach is full, and I know a lot of people get like that, or they're like, I'm just going to drink 3 gallons of water a day, and that'll keep me full. Well, it might trick your brain a little bit, but at the end of the day, you're still not consuming those calories, so you're really not going to fool yourself. So Julie, I would recommend definitely slowing down your eating so your brain can actually know that you're full, and that way you're not ravenous 20 to 30 minutes after. And then of course once your brain gets those chemicals, then it will understand that, oh, you fed me, okay, I'm not ravenous anymore. Matt did have a kind of an interesting follow-up question, and I do want to cover this right now. And Matt mentioned that not only has he experienced that before, which I feel like a lot of us do, but Matt also said about 2 hours later, he gets that same feeling of being hungry. So what a lot of people, I should say, at least in the bodybuilding community, and don't get me wrong, I've been there, right? I've been there, guys. I used to have to eat like every 2 hours. I trained myself to eat every 2 hours, whether I was in off season or contest prep, because that's back in the day when I was 19 years old. That's what the internet told me to do, and obviously, that's not necessarily the case that we have to eat every 2 hours or every 3 hours for that matter. So what we need to do is kind of detrain our brains. I know we're talking about tricking our brains here, but we need to get that mindset out of our heads where we need to eat every 2 or every 3 hours, and our body doesn't necessarily need to do that, because if we go back to like prehistoric times or when man first walked the earth, I'm not going to put a number on that because some people might argue with me over it, but regardless, prehistoric man, we didn't eat every 2 hours. We didn't necessarily even eat a lot every single day. We might have had a couple big meals throughout the week and that was it. Maybe 1 or 2 big meals, and then we gathered the rest of our food. So we technically we don't necessarily need to have a meal every single 2 hours. Obviously, I'm pushing it to the extreme there to prove a point. But I'll tell you guys what I do, for example, and that is during the week, I eat 5 meals a day, and then 1 protein shake. So I actually have 6 protein spikes throughout the course of the day on my training days. That's Monday through Saturday. On Sunday, believe it or not, I actually only eat 4 times. Only 4 protein spikes throughout the course of the day. And if from someone that's coming from 6 basically protein spikes to 4, that's a significant decrease. And what I've noticed, of course, I don't have the energy expenditure on my off day, so you could argue with that. But what I've found is that spacing my meals out maybe about 4 to 5 hours on my off day, I still am able to eat a lot of food in one given meal, so it's actually going to satiate me more. So instead of eating smaller meals, and Tommy commented there, and I think that was a joke, doesn't smaller meals stoke your metabolism? Yeah, Tommy, I believe that too when I first started. But right now, I'm in prep, and on Sundays or my off day, when I eat these 4 large meals every 4 to 5 hours, I'm just as satisfied as eating my smaller meals during the week, or I'm probably even more satisfied, I would go to say, just because I'm eating so much more food in one sitting. So right now, guys, my food is at 345 grams of carbohydrates, 260 grams of protein, and 65 grams of fat. So if you just roughly break that down, I'll do some math here because I'm not good at mental math, but that's about 16 to 17 grams of fat per meal, 260. That's about 65 grams of protein per meal, and then carbs are at 86 grams per meal. So that's a significant meal that I could put down in one sitting, and that's going to keep me satiated for an incredibly long time. And on those days, of course, I'm not working out like I said, and I might get in a gallon of water on those days. I don't feel the need to put down that much water because of the amount of food, and I'm not trying to trick my stomach in thinking that it's full because I am actually full. So Matt, I would definitely work on spacing your food out longer. And I know I got kind of get carried away on this first question. I know we're already 10 minutes into the video, but though that would be like my number one thing to do is, guys, we got to learn how to space our meals out. We don't necessarily need to eat every 3 hours, especially on our off days. You know, clump some meals together. Nobody says that you have to eat 5, 6, 7 meals a day. So play around with your numbers. Obviously, keep the macronutrients the same, but see how you feel. You know, we're allowed to try to change things up a little bit and kind of get away from the mainstream thinking. So that's one thing I would definitely go for. All right, that was a great first question, guys. All right, let's see what else we have to do. Matt Jackson, hitting me hard. First couple of questions are doozies. All right. And this is kind of tying into the one I just went over. So I'll briefly touch on this. But Matt Jackson hit me hard, I said. He said it would be a nice time to discuss some intermittent fasting. So as you guys know, I'm really not a huge fan of intermittent fasting. The only reason, I will say this, that I do like intermittent fasting is because of the reasons I just talked about to finish up the last question. Because it allows you to eat larger meals in a smaller window. So if you're someone, let's say for instance, on a Sunday, like I was talking about, who maybe, likes to sleep in, it's your one day off, and you just want to eat 3 meals on Sunday. Maybe you sleep in till 10, 11 o'clock, and you don't necessarily need to try to fit in 5 or 6 meals in a short amount of time before you go back to bed. Now I'm just making this thing up, and I just see Matt's tuning in now. Matt, we're talking about our intermittent fasting question. So I could see how that, and that's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call that intermittent fasting. I was just saying that's catching up on your sleep, and it's forcing you to eat less meals. But on Sunday, depending on what I'm doing, I actually might wake up a little bit later in the day. As opposed to eating breakfast at like 6:30, I may be eating breakfast at like 8:30. So am I doing intermittent fasting? Not necessarily, but my schedule changes. So I could see how some people might like intermittent fasting. It's not necessarily going to make you burn more calories. It's not necessarily going to help you lose more weight because at the end of the day, total calories are going to be the most important. But for reasons that I talked about in the last question, if you start lumping some of these meals together, you might actually feel more satiated over the course of the day. So if your calories are really low, guys, and you're really looking for something to help you kind of change up your routine a little bit, maybe try lumping the meals together. If you want to shorten that time frame where you are eating, that could help as well. But first and foremost, I would actually just lump some meals together on your off day and see what happens. And then maybe try it on a training day. But on training days, food timing is going to be a little bit more important. And that's probably another subject for a whole nother video is meal timing, especially around your workouts. But put it on an off day, play with it for a couple weeks, and see how you feel. Try it for a couple weeks in a row, and if you really like it, that's when you can start implementing it into your normal routine. Bronwyn asked, is there a certain food that best helps keep you satisfied longer? So I'll start with there. Is there a certain food? Not necessarily a certain food. There is a particular macronutrient that will help you, I should say 2 macronutrients that will keep you more sustained. One being protein, and then 2 being fat. So the amount of protein in a meal is going to help you keep you more satiated, and fat actually slows down the digestion of food within the system. So once again, that can actually help you keep full. Now, is there a certain food? Not necessarily, once again, a single food item, but these are things that you could look for. Food that is high in volume. Once again, at the very beginning of this video, we talked about the stomach stretching, and that's one of the contributing factors to letting our body know that we are in the process of getting full. So one is food that is high in volume. Two, food that is high in fiber. So typically, if we're eating like vegetables and fruits, maybe oatmeal, something along that nature, that would be a food that would be higher in fiber. And once again, that's going to take longer to break down in the system, and it's just going to keep our stomach fuller for longer. It's not like a simple sugar where we're just going to blow through it and that's going to be it, and then our body's going to get hungry quick. We want something that's going to be a little bit slower as far as breaking down. Now, I did not mention carbohydrates yet, but I kind of touched on them briefly. We want something that's high in fiber, and typically carbohydrate sources that are higher in fiber tend to be more complex in nature. So I'm not necessarily going to force anybody to eat a specific carbohydrate, but I'm pretty sure we all know what more complex carbohydrates are. Ones that are obviously a little bit lower in sugar. Things like brown rice and whole wheats and whole grains like that are going to digest a little bit slower as opposed, to their counterpart of the more simple nature. So that's what I would definitely recommend with that. And then Bronwyn followed up with, what other than gum is there to eat throughout the day? So Bronwyn, be mindful of gum because sometimes it does have sugars to it. And now those could actually add up depending on how much gum you're chewing throughout the course of the day. So obviously you're chewing it, you're swallowing the spit. You're not like you're spitting it out all the time. So you might be actually absorbing some carbohydrates. So be mindful of that for sure. Other than gum, there's really nothing besides water that I would really recommend. I mean, obviously things that are lower in calories you could eat throughout the day. So I know some people, and like let's say you're down to the nitty gritty, and you are really low on calories, let's say you didn't have a diet break in there. Let's say you dieted continuously for 40-some weeks and your metabolism is shot, and you're in a very bad place right now, which some of you might be who are listening to this right now, because after all, we are talking about in hunger during prep, and I'm here to help you guys out, try to deal with some of this hunger. So, what I haven't personally had to do it, I haven't necessarily had any of my clients do it, but I've heard other people get some mild success from this method. So let's say they're eating 4 meals every single day, and regular meals, and they're spaced 4 hours apart. This is just a hypothetical situation, so bear with me. But at the 2-hour mark, so halfway through between their meals, that person will actually eat a salad of some sort. Obviously more like lettuce and leafy greens, not necessarily too many carbohydrates. Obviously they're still considering that, adding that into their daily intake, but overall it is a very low calorie kind of a meal, kind of a snack, whatever you want to call it. But once again, it's going to go into the stomach. It's going to help that stomach expand, and it might actually help control hunger in between meals. It's not necessarily going to do anything for you as far as like replenishing glycogen stores or helping protein synthesis, but from a point of hunger, which after all, we are talking about hunger, it might actually help. So if you're spacing your meals 4 hours apart and you have a light salad, a voluminous salad halfway through at the 2-hour mark, and that's like a last case scenario where I would start, adding in a salad halfway through your meals. And guys, you just got to realize, just because a salad is healthy, those carbs still do add up. They still go to your daily total. So just be mindful of that. But that's kind of one of my tips if you are like absolutely starving and you need to eat something in between some meals here. All right, guys, we're going to move on to some other questions here. And Sam hitting me hard again. You guys hit me hard this week. And you know what? That's why I really like to do these videos, because not only do you guys, get some quality information, but honestly, it makes me a better coach. And like I said at the very beginning of this video, I don't always know the answers. No, I know a lot of these answers, or like at one point in time, I remember researching, leptin and ghrelin, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later, since I started off pretty hard with the whole the whole sciencey stuff about, when you're feeling full. And I'll kind of wrap that up here in a minute. But it makes me just keep on my toes about a lot of things. So I do appreciate all the great questions. Enough with that side tangent here. But San said, Other factors that can affect hunger, like sleep, food choices, etc. For example, when I was on prep and not sleeping well, I felt more hungry than when I got solid rest. So, Sam, after doing some research, and actually I went back to one of my old Facebook posts from like 2016 because I remember writing about leptin and ghrelin. So on this one, I strictly want to focus on ghrelin. Ghrelin, whatever you guys want to call it. And that is known as the quote-unquote hunger hormone, and it is produced by the stomach, particularly when it is empty. It's the highest right before we eat, and obviously the lowest, right after we eat. And Sam, what I'm getting at here, as far as your question about, if your sleep is not as good, you find yourself more hungry. So, what happens, at least in terms of ghrelin? Studies have shown when your stress is high, when you're in stressful situations, your ghrelin levels can actually rise. So that means you're going to be more hungry. And as many of you know, because I feel like a lot of people who are tuning into these videos or who are listening to this replay on SoundCloud or my YouTube, know that contest prep can be very, very stressful, right? It's not a walk in the park. And I feel like a lot of people think that it might be because they see on social media, people posting all these pictures and la-di-da-di-da, oh, it's not that hard. I still feel fine at super low body fat. I still feel fine when I'm eating, rabbit food. They don't. It's all a lie. Honest to God, if you hear somebody say I feel great and I'm eating, 1,000 calories a day and I'm doing 6 sessions of cardio a week for an hour a day, they're full of shit. Excuse the language, but they are. So anyway, getting a little fired up about that one. When you're in a very stressful situation, your ghrelin levels are going to be elevated, and that is why some people, when they're overly stressed, so let's say, like back in school when we had a big test coming up or something, or at work, we're under crunch time, and people tend to stress eat, right? If we're at a desk job and we have like a bag of snacks next to us in our drawer or our snack drawer, people tend to reach for that when they encounter a stressful situation because food is very rewarding. And we were talking about earlier on, the brain's response to food, and you do get kind of like a reward when you eat food. Dopamine is released, and it is it's a great feeling. When we eat, obviously. Food has that effect on a lot of people, and you can't really trick your brain into not thinking that. Now, I know some people might say, "Well, I only view food as fuel." Well, that's all good and well. That may be how you view it, but tell your brain that. So once again, we can't really trick our brain at the end of the day. But Sam, unfortunately, with that, stress management is going to be key. So yes, absolutely, trying to get enough sleep. Obviously, sleep is one of the toughest things to do and acquire during contest prep. So what can we do? I actually just had this conversation with somebody that was messaging me back and forth on Facebook the other day about a nightly routine that you could kind of get in the zone to help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. So I'll just kind of touch into that briefly, although it is kind of getting away from the hunger standpoint. I feel like it is very relevant for this question. And what I do pretty much every single night, I start getting my food ready for the next day about 8 p.m. I get my supplements ready. At about 8:30, I have my last meal of the day. At 9 o'clock, I don't look at my phone anymore. I don't check emails, and I might start watching TV with my wife from about 9 to 9:45. At about 9:45, we turn everything off, just because, when you are looking at like blue light when you're on your phone, I do shut my phone off to night mode if I go onto it, so it cuts off the blue light. I don't go on my computer that late anyway, And really, you just have to kind of start winding down. Now, I know that's easier said than done, just because, like I said, in prep, it's a very stressful situation. We're always thinking about a lot of things. We have a lot of things going on. So yes, Tommy even said it, try some kind of a sleep aid, Coraz's in particular. That can help you, but once again, I really think that a nightly routine is even more important than supplementation. So seek that route first, and then kind of circle back to a sleep aid if necessary. But once again, I don't necessarily recommend those off the bat. I would much rather you develop some kind of a nightly routine to help with stress management, and then in turn to help with some hunger. All right, Bronwyn asked another great question here. She said, how do you know if it's true hunger versus you just wanting to eat? So I did touch upon that earlier as far as really spacing out your meals. And we don't necessarily, although we might think that, oh man, it's been 2 hours, it's been 3 hours, like I've trained my body to eat at this point, you might not actually be hungry. Now, obviously, if we are, and I guess I'll touch on leptin here. Leptin is known as the starvation hormone, and essentially it comes from fat. The more fat that we have, and I'm talking about body fat, not fat that we're consuming, the more fat that we have on our bodies, the more leptin that we have. So obviously when we are dieting down, and the less leptin that we have in our system, if I'm getting that right. And then that's gonna, trigger our starvation hormone. So we're gonna want to eat more then. So unfortunately, if our leptin levels have lowered, then there's nothing we can do about that, because the only way to get those leptin levels back up is to put on more body fat. And obviously, as physique competitors, as bodybuilders, we don't want to put more fat on. After all, that's the goal. We're trying to strip away fat and maintain muscle. So Bronwyn, there's really not a whole lot we can do to differentiate, I would say. So that's just something that we have to deal with, and it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of one of those things that we have to roll with the punches. Tommy asked, have I or do I recommend using Core Burn to substitute your hunger? Although things like thermogenics and caffeine, and there is an appetite suppressant, a mild appetite suppressant in there. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, like, to help suppress appetite, honest to God. Once again, that's more of like an extreme level to help, and I would almost, this is gonna sound kind of silly, but like cigarettes, like the nicotine is like an appetite suppressant. That's just like asking me, would I recommend somebody smoking cigarettes? I know it's an extreme, but no, I wouldn't try any kind of appetite suppressors like outright. I think there's a lot of other methods that we can go to before we go down that route. But yeah, absolutely. Core Burn does have a slight appetite suppressant in it. So if anybody's looking for that, obviously it's more so like a thermogenic and a fat burner, but it does also have that benefit of suppressing the appetite some. All right, Matthias, have I ever used more calorically dense foods in the earlier stages of prep of my diet, and then as I kind of go deeper and deeper, do I choose more voluminous foods? So I thought that was kind of funny. Those of you who know Matthias know that he's actually one of my clients, and that's not something that I go and I tell a lot of people. I don't really talk about my personal diet too much and like how I go about it. So Matthias he nailed it. Like maybe I should put that in my diet protocol as kind of one of the tricks of the trade. It's kind of one that I've kept to myself, but since Matthias brought it up, I'll kind of let you guys know what I do. So yeah, right now, and even in the off season, like I eat very dense foods. My food gets up there. I've been over, I've actually been at 700 grams of carbs. But more recently, I was cruising at, this past off season, I was, cruising at like, upwards of 500 grams of carbs a day. Fat was near 100, and I was eating pretty dense foods. Now, honestly, I'm still eating basically the same foods, just less. When my carbs probably get under 300 grams per day, I will probably change my food sources. I'm very stubborn when it comes to switching out my main groups. For instance, my basically breakfast and my bedtime snack is some kind of combination of Greek yogurt and granola, cereal, nuts, whatever. And granola is dense, cereal can be dense. And yeah, so that'll eventually change, if necessary. But right now, when my hormones are not out of whack, when my leptin levels are still fairly high, I'm still at a decent body fat percentage. I don't monitor my body fat percentage, but it's still at a high enough percentage where my leptin levels, are still under control. Where my hunger hormone, my ghrelin levels, my stomach is still pretty full. But yeah, that will be a trick when I go in contest prep, and that's where you see a lot of people talking about these recipes where your food is super voluminous, and they're eating these huge monster salads that are relatively low calorie. They're making these protein fluff bowls. Those don't look particularly appetizing to me. And in all honesty, guys, my food historically in the past has not had to get particularly low, so I really haven't had to go that route. And I'm kind of sorry to say that, and I haven't experienced it firsthand, but I typically eat like just normal average everyday foods. I just eat less. I haven't had to go to big salads. My carbs, and some of you might not be too happy to hear this, but my carbs last prep got to a low of 255 grams a day. And, that's a lot for most people. Some people eat, close to that. Some ladies don't even eat that in their off season. Karen says she hates me right now. So, that's my low. And so my food selection doesn't have to change all that much. Now, sure, going from 500 and cutting my carbs essentially in half to 250, obviously there's some change in there, but I just haven't had to go to the extremes that some people might have. So yeah, guys, that's unfortunate. I don't necessarily have that firsthand experience, but yes, choosing foods that are higher in volume are definitely a little bit better option. What does Karen say here? Karen said, I don't even want to know what her low was. No, Karen, I really don't. I'll probably feel bad for you. All right. Ben asked, this might be more of a statement, guys, so we'll see. He says, listening to your body, what does it mean when your body just doesn't feel like it wants to eat? So, Ben, that could be, you just have like high leptin levels. So maybe that's kind of throwing you off a little bit. Maybe the body fat is just a little bit high, so maybe that's throwing it off. Courtney shooting me down says, how many snickerdoodle cookies can you eat a day? Courtney, I'm not going to answer that publicly. But seriously, guys, I do eat like 3 or 4 cookies a day. How many of those are snickerdoodle cookies? I can't say. All right. Ben also asked water intake. Regarding water intake later at night when you're limiting water intake, what are some things to do that help you control hunger pains before bed? So Ben, I would really recommend spacing out your food a little bit better. At least for all my clients, and Ben is actually one of my clients, I give a rough breakdown over the course of the day where people are supposed to be following it at least closely. That should kind of help you keep you more sustained throughout the course of the day. Lydia asked, the best way to manage food intake when you have a very, very long day. She wakes up at 4:15 a.m. And goes to bed about 11 p.m. So she says, I could deal with that in my off season. Obviously, she's eating more calories in her off season. But what can we do about that during contest prep? And she even gave me some examples like spreading food intake throughout the day, increasing calories on that day, using it as a refeed day. So Lydia, I'll tell you guys, for those of you who don't know Lydia, she is a personal trainer at a gym. She runs the whole show there, and obviously if she's getting up at 4:15 and is there and going to bed at 11 p.m., she has very long days. So as I talked about in the very, very, very beginning, although we are at the 33-minute mark here, now 34, she has a very, very long day. So as I talked about earlier in the recording, that Maybe even for Lydia, like quote unquote intermittent fasting might work a little bit better. Just because if we shorten that window, in all honesty, and this is me personally, and I'm not speaking for Lydia, but this is how I feel at 4:15 a.m. I don't want to eat. I'm half asleep. I'm 3/4 asleep at 4:15 a.m. So I really don't feel like eating. So what I would recommend for someone that has a very, very long day, like Lydia, is maybe have your first meal at 7:15. Get your work done in the morning. Don't eat for a while and then start spacing your food out. And then once again, cut your last meal off of the day at 9 p.m. There's no rule that says you have to eat right at 11 p.m. if you're going to bed then. There's no rule that says that you have to, if you wake up at 4:15, that you have to eat right at 4:15. So maybe shortening that window of time where you're actually eating might be more beneficial for someone that has, a 16 plus hour day. And then Dawn actually asked a follow-up question kind of to Lydia's here. And guys, if you want to ask any more questions in the live feed, now would be the time because we are getting to the end of the questions here. So Dawn asked, running off the question that we just said, graveyard shift, and she says that she works 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. When do you stop eating? And I think what she's getting at here, at least this is how I interpreted it, as for those of you who are use MyFitnessPal, it only counts one day at a time, and obviously she's working over the course of 2 days. So for those people, first and foremost, I would actually recommend writing it down on paper. I know that may be a little bit more work, but you could just kind of keep track of your days longer. Now, as far as when do you stop eating? So no matter what schedule you're on, what I always recommend is from the time that you get up to the time that you go to bed, that's when your eating schedule is. It doesn't matter what time of the day it is. So for instance, let's say, let's flip that around. What if you worked from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.? And that might help us understand a little bit better. Obviously, you would start eating roughly at 7 a.m., 7 p.m., or 7 to 8 a.m., and then you would stop eating, roughly at 6 or 7 p.m. So flip that around. You might start eating, let's say you get up at 5 p.m., and then you start eating about, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., and then once again, you might stop eating right before you go to bed at 5 or 6 a.m. So just kind of flip that around, and that's how I recommend people approaching that. All right, last question, guys, and then we will wrap it up here. And once again, I do appreciate all these great questions. This topic is very important to help people manage their hunger, not only during prep, but obviously, even if we're having super long days. So Lydia asked the last question here, and I guess it's not necessarily relevant to hunger, but kind of is. So she said, prep, while in prep, basically living with your spouse who's a non-competitor, what are the best methods to make that work? So obviously, we're hungrier during prep, our spouse is not as hungry as we are, so what can we do? Well, let's circle back to some of the things that we covered. You might have to eat different foods. Let's be honest. When it comes down to the nitty gritty, you might have to cook 2 separate meals, or your spouse might have to fend for themselves, and because you're making your own food, and then they have to make their food. What I try to do, and this is me, I actually do the majority of the cooking in my family. Believe it or not, it's just me and my wife. I cooked this dinner today. She's could be home right now. I don't even know. But anyway, I try to cook foods that I know I can eat, that she will actually enjoy. So let's try to go about it that way. Is cook healthy, quote unquote healthy, but they could always just eat more. They don't have to eat rabbit food. While you might, depending on where your calories are, but having that kind of relationship with your spouse, where they support you through this, where they might even eat the same foods, maybe just more. For instance, if you're eating, vegetables and rice, and you're only having a small portion of rice and a lot of vegetables, well, maybe they can have a lot of rice and just little vegetables, and you guys could sit there and eat the same thing, and still enjoy each other's company. That's one of the hardest things to do, just because my spouse is a non-competitor, and like I said, I typically do the most of the cooking. But last night, if you guys looked on my Instagram account, my wife made me steak, potatoes, and vegetables, which was very nice. And she weighs everything out for me, and that's one other thing it's a stress reliever, right? And we talked about keeping the stress down to keep the ghrelin levels low, and it's a stress reliever for me to not necessarily have to make all my meals, so I could come home and get a nice cooked meal from her, and not have to worry about getting my last meal in the other day. So guys, that's going to wrap up this week's Weekly Wednesday live Q&A. For everybody that tuned in live on Facebook, I do appreciate you. For those of you guys who are re-listening on SoundCloud, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So once again, guys, these are our Weekly Wednesday live videos, live at 6 p.m. Central Time on my Facebook page in particular. They will be replayed on my YouTube account under my name, Brandon Wadas, of course. You guys all know who I am by now. You've been listening to me for 40 minutes. You guys have a great night, and I will see you all very soon.